Today we will talk about Darwin's 1859 introduction to the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Darwin begins his introduction by mentioning his voyage to South America. When on board the HMS Beagle as naturalist, I was much struck with certain facts in the distribution of the inhabitants of South America and in the geological relations of the present to the past inhabitants of that continent. Among the small thrills of encountering canonical works for the first time are the moments when you come across some turn of phrase so well used it has been worn flat into the surface of everyday speech and think, so that's where that comes from. Darwin's second phrase of the introduction belongs to this category. These facts seem to me to throw some light on the origin of species, that mystery of mysteries, as it has been called by one of our greatest philosophers. He continues his introduction by describing some details on the way he formulated and wrote his theory. On my return home, it occurred to me in 1837 that something might perhaps be made out on this question by patiently accumulating and reflecting on all sorts of facts which could possibly have any bearing on it. After 5 years' work, I allowed myself to speculate on the subject and drew up some short notes. These I enlarged in 1844 into a sketch of the conclusions, which then seemed to me probable. From that period to the present day, I have steadily pursued the same object. I hope that I may be excused for entering on these personal details, says Darwin, as I give them to show that I have not been hasty in coming to a decision. On the Origin of Species was published on 24 November 1859. This work of scientific literature is considered to be the foundation of evolutionary biology. Darwin's book introduced the scientific theory that populations evolve over the course of generations through a process of natural selection. The book presents a body of evidence that the diversity of life arose by common descent through a branching pattern of evolution. Darwin included evidence that he had gathered on the Beagle expedition in the 1830s and his subsequent findings from research, correspondence, and experimentation. Darwin's aims were twofold. First of all, to show that species had been separately created, and to show that natural selection had been the chief agent of change. Darwin's concept of evolutionary adaptation through natural selection became central to modern evolutionary theory, now the unifying concept of the life sciences. Let's read the final paragraph of the introduction. No one ought to feel surprise at much remaining as yet unexplained in regard to the origin of species and varieties, if he makes due allowance for our profound ignorance in regard to the mutual relations of all the beings which live around us. Who can explain why one species ranges widely and is very numerous, and why another allied species has a narrow range and is rare? Yet, these relations are of the highest importance, for they determine the present welfare and, as I believe, the future success and modification of every inhabitant of this world. Still less do we know of the mutual relations of the innumerable inhabitants of the world during the many past geological epochs in its history. Although much remains obscure and will long remain obscure, I can entertain no doubt, after the most deliberate study and dispassionate judgment of which I am capable, that the view which most naturalists entertain, and which I formerly entertained, namely that each species has been independently created, is erroneous. I am fully convinced that species are not immutable, but that those belonging to what are called the same genera are lineal descendants of some other and generally extinct species in the same manner as the acknowledged varieties of any one species are the descendants of that species. Furthermore, Darwin says, I am convinced that natural selection has been the main but not exclusive means of modification.